My history with this game goes way back before it was a massive box, before it had its Kickstarter. It was a game at the time just called Dungeoneers that I was sent by the designer. It was a prototype sort of P&P version of the game. And I did a video on it, and you can see the link to the video up here. And then I did another video on it around the Kickstarter time. And here I am back with a video discussion of the game as it is now out on my ancillary gaming table. And the ancillary gaming table, just because it's so big and because it is going to stay here for quite a while. And so, what I want to do is just talk about some aspect of the game as I set myself up to play that I think really distinguishes this from other tabletop systems that I have, although it makes it similar to certain other games that involve simply a pen, a paper, and maybe a small book, kind of the opposite of this. And I just want to get into talking about that a little bit here as my way of showing you what I'm doing with the game as I set out with my party who has landed in this place. It's hard to read it, Coal Fell, and their first quest is over here. They have already, though, based on the background of one of my characters, the goal for the first character I made to get back to his hometown all the way up here with some money for his family, for his mom. And that came out as I was starting to make my party with my first character. And I want to this is what I want to focus on in this video. The fact that this game is so much more than dungeon crawling, and the fact that it exists in a world where you come from a place. There are places you are going to go to that you have relationships with. And though it was described as optional, when I was making my first character, I rolled up was Dash the Halfling Thief. And it was going along pretty easily with the rolling up my stats and giving him a weapon, pretty traditional stuff, of course. And then I got to the background section, and I rolled that he came from poverty and he has this personal goal, which is to try to save 1,000 credits for his family. He's never going to be left with less than 10. And when we have the money, he's going to want to pay that money, bring it to his village, which turned out randomly to be the place all the way up here. And he will get 2,000 experience points for doing that. Now, because this was the first character I rolled, I chose this to be my anchor point for what's going to be many, many, many hours of, I guess you could call it a campaign. I'm going to call it a story because I'm going to be playing the quests completely randomly. I didn't follow the direction in the book to start with the particular first or second quest because this is not my first time playing the game. I did that. This is probably my third time round with the game. I did that when I initially played the game. So I'm going random for the quests, and I went random for where we begin in the world. And so automatically I am starting out this entire game with a sense of the place here, with a sense that this character is going to be having this personal quest to get back to his village and maybe having to convince the rest of his party to go with him, to help him, and to sort of put aside their own personal goals for wealth at a certain point to collect the money to give it to him to deliver back to his family. The next thing I decided to do was I'm going to play a warrior priest, essentially a cleric. I hadn't done this before when I played this game, and I liked just the concept of having the prayers. I'm always interested in playing magic users, as you know, if you watch this channel with any consistency. And this backstory here, he's a troll slayer, so he must slay a troll and land the killing blow, and then if he does that, he honors his own lineage, and he gains 1,000 experience points. So we've got a warrior priest, but who is intent on killing a troll. And then, of course, I have to play a wizard, must bring in the wizard. And so we have Celestio the wizard, and I chose some spells for him, a close combat spell, a sort of attack spell, and then a healing spell as his first spells. And his backstory ended up being that he has revenge. So this is he's sort of seeking out a minotaur that had, I think it had destroyed his family or something. I can't remember the reason for that, but when they encounter minotaurs, he's going to recognize the scar of that minotaur, and if it is the right one, he's going to defeat it to gain 1,000 experience points. This feels like a really long game kind of quest, because in order to identify that right minotaur, you're going to have to go through a lot. So that feels like playing a super long game. And then finally, an alchemist. The reason I chose an alchemist is I love crafting. I love the idea that you have something explicit to do in the world. You can always make a foraging roll as you're traveling around, but if you have an alchemist, you can be collecting things and making recipes. And I love the explicit nature of the character that is devoted to figuring out what is in the land, in mining the land, and in garnering things from nature to make potions and such. His backstory is fables, and he's supposed to visit 3 quest sites in the ancient lands. Now, I'm pretty sure the ancient lands are not even here. The ancient lands is an expansion, I think. And so, again, this is just the promise of something to come, that he will gain his 1,500 experience points after the 3rd site in the ancient lands. So that's something that is going to be for even the far future. The reason that I think this game distinguishes itself from all other kind of tabletop systems, and by that I mean, for the purposes of this discussion, those with physical components, is the fact that there's a world, a broad world, and there are specific characters. And then, of course, every quest is going to take place in effect in a dungeon or another. There's going to be a story for the quest, and we can take a look at the one that I just rolled up for their first quest in a minute. But in effect, those are all different types of dungeon crawls with a limited amount of space and corridors and room tiles and a little light story that goes with it, of course. So the meat of the game in that sense is the dungeon crawl. But the distinguishing factor is the world, and the fact that you need to set out from a place and travel to the quest site, that along the way you will be on roads, or you will be in the desert, or you will be in the wilds, and you could have the potential for travel events that happen. And you can't just, well, you can just sit down and find a quest and go into a dungeon if you want to play that way. But the way the game really shines is not to do that, is to play the characters in the world. And in this particular case, because we randomly started out here, kind of away, pretty far away from the central city over here, the inn that we had to stay in and pay for overnight was super expensive. And I can only think it's because they're out really in the wilds here. And just from the very beginning of the game, when I set out to spend my money that we had left over to stay in the inn, and I think it cost 35 coins a night, it was like, I felt it right at the outset. I felt like, wow, I can't believe it's so expensive that we have to stay here. I was happy that our quest site was close by. So we've already traveled to this quest site before I started doing this video, and nothing really happened along the way. It was very close, as you can see. But you could be in a situation even before you get to your quest where you're having to deal with traveling events along in the wilderness, as well as foraging for food and using your rations and maintaining your party together, whether you can rest out in the wild or whether you can find yourself in a settlement to be a little bit safer. that combined with the details of being in the dungeon space and fulfilling the individual quests that you're doing is what distinguishes this game, I think, from anything. I think the closest thing it is in my mind is to probably D100 Dungeon, although in D100 Dungeon, you're playing a sole character. Here, you're playing a party. And you can choose, if you don't want to spend the time to roll up for individual characters, you can choose from the built in hirelings that you can bring with you. So you can just develop, say, one character and play with three hirelings, or two characters and play with two hirelings if you're playing solo. For me, the richness of the game is spending the time to make the four characters. It took me a while to do it, but I have a feeling for my characters. I'm beginning to identify with what my characters want. And over the course of time, as they travel, as they level up, they will have their own experiences. And together as a party, they will have experiences. And that is what makes this game, I think, so unique. So to get back to the D100 dungeon comparison, the reason why it is, I think, reminiscent of that is not just because the stats are based on a D100 roll that you're trying to succeed or fail on, but because of the combination of the specificity, the range of quests, and the most recent world builder addition to D100 creates more of a world and a setting that your characters are in. But it does that with pen and paper. There obviously are not physical components to that game set. It's quite different in that regard. And you could play D100 Dungeon with the world builder and the basic book that's probably just this or slightly more than this material in printed form, as opposed to the massive physical components of the League of Dungeoneers. But in terms of the gameplay and the feel, to me, I think that's it is closest to that. You might wonder why I'm not saying something like Four Against Darkness, because here you really do need four characters, or at least a character with three other mercenaries, or perhaps some companions like familiars or dogs. I think that it is Four Against Darkness is just inherently so much lighter, and it does not have the level of detail that something like this has, or D100 Dungeon. So to me, that's not really a comparison to this game. But if you're looking for this game experience and not in this game box, I think D100 Dungeon is the one you're looking for. But anyway, back to this. So we rolled up a random quest and to start out, and as I said, it ended up being nearby. But the first quest that we're going to set out to do with our party is the baptizing quest, which uses the objective room, the fountain room. So in this particular quest, it talks about the old ritual of baptizing weapons meant to fight evil. And this ritual cannot be just done with any water, but requires water from one of the sacred fountains. The heroes have been tasked with retrieving some of the water for the local garrison, and however, the closest fountain to the heroes is overrun by a tribe of orcs and goblins. Determined to succeed with their quest, they make their way into the abandoned castle which contains the fountain. So we have our quest information here, the threat level, and the minimum and maximum, the starting threat, where it is randomly that I rolled up. There are no special rules. It's 7 corridors and 7 rooms. We're going to get 300 credits per hero, and we're going to be encountering orcs and goblins. So that is the quest that we just set up here, and I randomized to create my encounter or my exploration deck, and in the very first tile, as it turns out, is basically a totally empty tile. That it's an empty chamber. And I initially thought maybe I could search it anyway, but in reading it over again, I feel like I can't actually search it. So we just kind of moved through it, and we're going to be dealing with this door and then moving forward and going through and doing that. I'm going to say just about this game that it is one where I think to get the maximum enjoyment out of it, the combination of the overland and the specific quests and the repeated play to not just get things, but to really do character development and to have characters experience the world. Like at the very beginning of the gameplay, I had to also spend my money here repairing some of my damaged items. And again, that was like automatically setting out to, I had to do it. And yet I didn't really want to spend the money to do it. And I was lucky then that I didn't have to then travel far to go to the first quest because I was worried about buying rations. So all that kind of stuff, I think, makes you think about this as like a living, breathing world. And again, not to keep repeating myself, but to keep repeating myself, that is what distinguishes this game, I think, from so many out there. It's the world part of it, that you really do feel like you are in a world with your characters. And the other piece of it, I will say, is I want to talk about house ruling the game and taking this as a toolbox to make your own story and your own RPG development out of it. And one of the really great resources to do that is the companion book. Now, I mentioned that you don't necessarily have to make your own character. You can use some of the pre-made characters to travel with you as mercenaries, or you can have, there's familiars, and you have some generic characters like a generic wizard or whatever. I, as I said, feel that making my own party is a lot of what I wanted to do to get involved in the game. But using these cards that I have somewhere, I'm going to use these, I'm going to randomize these and create them to be NPCs in the game. And I'm going to do that as I get into a number of different quests, so that, for example, an objective room might not just have the orcs and the goblins, but if it's relevant, I would pull in an alchemist or a novice or a wizard or something that would be the NPC that would be in that room, not from the quest materials here, but using the cards and having my characters, as I develop my characters, giving them little stories so that they can interact with the companion cards as NPCs, so that each encounter isn't just a combat or a fight. Maybe instead of doing some kind of fight, they would have some conversation to see if they could get some information about something. I don't know exactly how I'm going to use that yet because I'm just starting out, but I am going to do that and I think that it makes it really possible by having this stack of companions and having them fleshed out as NPCs, really. And so if we encountered Stephanie the Apprentice, who's recently graduated from the College of Wizardry, and here are the spells that she has in her gear and stuff, we could interact with her. We could talk to her. We could ask her to direct us somewhere to do something. I don't know, because I haven't developed my story yet. But I think this gives you a toolbox for doing that. And the main aspect of the toolbox is the companions. Of course, you have all of these monsters and things that you can use and rules for bringing them in. But the flexibility of having other sentient beings wandering around the world through the use of the companions in that way, I think also adds so much to the game. So, for example, you could decide, if you're traveling to a bigger city like Silver City here, put 5 random companion cards here, and when you get there, just encounter those people, those NPCs, and out of that, develop a story and figure out what your characters might be doing or how they might be interacting with them, and bring in some other kind of solo RPG supporting materials to do that, like oracle tables or whatever. Oh, here's an alchemist. Is this alchemist related to my alchemist? And if so, how? And maybe they can help us in some way or something like that. So that is my game plan for playing League of Dungeoneers. I know that it's going to be out on this table. This is my sort of secondary gaming table, and it's where I put things that need to stay up for quite some time. And I've got this set up here, and I'm going to be playing through it, and as I said, developing the story of my party of characters here, and in so doing, have them interact with other NPCs in the world that I'm going to draw from the companion's book.